this stage as part of our Earth program. I'm here today representing the Department of Ecology, but here to do all of this today. Folks joining me on stage that I'll introduce next are all part of the Ecology family, representing our scientific and engineering, innovation, and public health priorities, central to all the work that we do here at the Department of Ecology under that banner. But beyond that, they also represent your neighbors, friends, folks that have chosen public service as a career, faces and names behind the official letterhead that are always nice to see instead of, what you see in your inbox. So today, we're going to spend a little time talking about the work being done right now in South Seattle and in South King County and around the state to make each day a little cleaner, a little healthier than the day before, and the things that you can do to take advantage of all of our programs. And then at the end, if time allows, we may open it up to a couple of questions. If there's anybody in the audience that wishes to throw out a question, or if our panelists suddenly hear, hey, I didn't know that you did that. Tell me more about your work as my coworker here. So I'll start with introductions. We have Sandra Matthews, and wave as I say your names, if you would, for the folks watching on the live stream. Sandra Matthews leads our cleanup work for affordable housing in Ecology's Northwest region, including King County. Justin Rewerts, hi Justin, leads a team of scientists working to reduce toxic chemicals in consumer products that you use every day. Caitlin Kelly, in my program, the air quality program, supervises the overburdened communities grants unit within that program, finding some practical community level solutions to reduce air pollution. Also with us today is Kim Wooten, who manages the toxics cleanup program in Ecology's Northwest Regional Office. That's based in Shoreline. And Carolyn Bowie, who is a waste reduction and recycling specialist, helping businesses, schools, and other organizations find alternatives to landfills. So thank you all for joining me and everybody at Ecology today here at Healthy Earth, Healthy You, what we're calling our panel today, and for sharing a little more about the work that you do with the Rainier Avenue Radio audience. So we'll just dive right in first with Sandra, talking about affordable housing and cleanup. For years now, Sandra, we've known, of course, about housing shortages around the state, the difficulty in finding affordable housing. Ecology, probably not the first agency that you would think of, though, right, when it comes to solving affordable housing and finding people a safe and clean place to live. So tell us a little bit about the work you do for Ecology and what it is that you do within the affordable housing cleanup grant section. What is that all about?
Thank you, Taylor. I'm a hydrogeologist at the Department of Ecology, and in the toxics cleanup program, we oversee cleaning up of contaminated sites. So properties where previous industrial or business uses have contaminated the soil and groundwater, and we help clean up those sites. We direct the work and we make sure that it's clean enough to use for whatever the future purpose of that site is. So the Affordable Housing Grant Program is basically a program that melds the need for affordable housing with the work that we do. So we help people by cleaning up the property and requiring the person who's developing to build new affordable housing.
So when I think of cleaning up, I'm imagining you putting on boots and gloves and digging in the dirt. But tell me a little more about the practical effect of this grants program. How do you make it easier for a developer to accomplish their task?
Okay, so in general, for businesses, cleanup is driven by development. And so developers want to build something where they're going to make money, and they go into neighborhoods and they build something really nice, but it might be priced out of what the people who live in the neighborhood can afford. So the benefit of our program is that we help developers to defray the cost of the cleanup work so that their bottom line can pencil out keeping affordability in the mix. So our grant, we offer developers technical support for the services, and we give them money for the cleanup as long as they commit to making at least 40% of the development project into affordable housing. That has to stay for 30 years.
30 years, wow.
Yeah. It's a long time. So, and it helps so that they go into neighborhoods, because developers can go into a neighborhood and build a project and they price it, and the people who live in the neighborhood can't afford that. And so they have to get priced out of the neighborhood. But if they can afford to make some of it affordable, the people who live in the neighborhood can benefit from the redevelopment, the newness, and the clean environment, because they've been living with the impacts from the previous businesses before that.
Well, and I want to know a little more about that, because contamination, it means a lot of things to a lot of different programs just within ecology, much less, all the other agencies and developers and everybody involved in this. So is there a common, pollutant or a common thread on how folks are exposed at these sites that you've been helping to clean up?
Right. That's a good question, because in cities, there are former businesses, gas stations, dry cleaners, light manufacturing, and a property will change hands and they'll change the business that's there, but not necessarily clean it up from the impacts of that business. And so there are contaminants in the soil and the groundwater, perhaps from the business that was there. And they're not required to clean it up, or they clean it up and they don't do a very good job. And so we try to give them the technical support for that and help them clean up for residential development if they're going to build affordable housing.
Right.
So kind of the contaminants that we're talking about are gasoline and hydrocarbons and volatiles from dry cleaners.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
Right. And light manufacturing. So it might be metals or something like that. And they could impact the actual people living in the house, because vapors can enter the basement from the soil below the house and make the air quality hard to live with. So, and it could cause you to maybe increase your risk of getting some disease. So in order to keep that, let me go back, because the main way that people get exposed to the chemicals is usually through inhalation and ingestion. Okay. So making sure that the air quality is good is important, and cleaning up the contamination will help that, because there's no source that impact the air quality. And children are the most vulnerable in that sense.
Of course, tiny little lungs that are growing and everything.
Tiny little lungs, and their hand-to-mouth behaviors are hard.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that the soil is cleaned up. You want to make sure that they're breathing clean air.
So you go home at night after a hard day at work at Ecology. What's the scoreboard look like? Now, how many projects have you been able to fund? What do you get to talk about with your daughter at the dinner table?
Right now in this affordable housing grant program, we have about 12 projects. Okay. At different phases. Let me tell you specifically about a couple of them. The first project was Mount Baker Housing Authority's Maddox property, which opened about 3 years ago. Totally affordable, added over 200 units of affordable housing to the neighborhood.
I had no idea it was that big.
Right.
200, geez.
Over 200 units, right? Family units. And so then we have a Millworks project, which is in Bellingham, and it's part of a bigger cleanup site, but we were able to clean up that site and 80 new affordable units in that area. Sorry, I didn't tell you, at Maddox helped clean up 2 contaminated sites. So that project is 2 buildings, and it had 2 contaminated sites on it.
Were they different contaminants between the 2?
They were.
Okay.
One was a dry cleaner and one was an old gas station. And so it made it, this grant program makes it so that we get these contaminated sites, the historical ones, old ones that have been on the books for a while, cleaned up, that wouldn't normally have been cleaned up. So it's great. And just let me tell you about two more.
Of course.
Super excited.
I'm keeping track of time. You've got plenty of time.
Because the Grand Street Commons project, which is right up Rainier Avenue, just opened in January, and they have over 750 units in that project.
Wow.
It was a mixed market rate and affordable, but more than half the units are affordable units in that project. There are 3 buildings, 3 blocks, and it's beautiful. And it's in a place where there wasn't a lot of housing at all.
Yeah.
It's really needed right next to transportation. So.
And those are the 30-year affordability clauses, right?
30-year affordability, and we cleaned up 2 contaminated sites there too. There was a dry cleaners and there was a manufacturing facility there.
Yeah.
So, so the environment is cleaner, and we have housing, so you get a win-win for the community. And because there are so many affordable units, people who live in the area can stay.
This is where Tony puts in the double whammy sound effect from the morning show, I think. This is fantastic. Okay, so we're talking then about areas that are going to be livable for a long, long time, affordable for a long, long time. If someone is listening right now, watching the stream right now, and thinking, okay, well, 5-10 years away, I might be making a move. I might be downsizing or upsizing, depending on what their situation is right now. How do they get into a place like this? How do they learn more about the projects you're doing?
Well, there's a couple of ways, but the most direct way, according to this program, is if you go to our website, go to Ecology's website, look up affordable housing, you will see a list of the projects who we've been funding.
Okay.
And then you'll know the name. And then you can Google the name. And when the developers are far enough along in their project, they have a website that has information, and that information will tell you it will give you instructions on how to join, how to apply to live in those facilities. Okay.
Ecology.wa.gov, right? And then we've got a search bar right there, and what's the name of the program?
Affordable Housing Grant Program.
Affordable Housing Grant Program. Easy enough. Do it now. You'll be thanking yourself later when you have a clean and affordable place to live. Sandra Matthews from Ecology's Northwest Regional Office, thank you for taking time today with us to talk about affordable housing. Next up, we have Kim Wooten from the Toxics Cleanup Program. For listeners who may have taken the Rainier Avenue Radio bus tour this week, Kim's program is actually one that's really involved with some of the places, the scenes that were along that bus tour. A lot of focus on the waterway that you drove over and around the Lower Duwamish Waterway. Kim, thanks for being part of the conversation, and tell me a little bit about your work in the program and what it means when we say river cleanup, because it's you can't put a squeegee on a river, right? It doesn't work that way.
If only it were so easy.
Yeah.
It is not that easy. Thanks. I'm glad to be here today, and I'm glad that some of those listeners got a chance to get out and see some of this area and hear about some of the community work going on, because that's not going to come out in detail in my answers today, but it is a really big and important part of the projects down here as a whole.
Yeah.
So my current role in Ecology is the section manager for the Toxics Cleanup Program in the Northwest region. You are correct. That is the same place where Sandra works. We're just talking about a few different facets of our work here today. As you may guess from the name of that program, and from listening to Sandra, we do a lot of work cleaning up contaminated sites. In soil, sediment, which we'll talk about in a river, but not in affordable housing projects so much, and other environmental media. We also do have a prevention arm. We give them a little shout out. We have a group of folks who inspect underground storage tank facilities and businesses.
Okay, it's like gas stations or?
Yeah, a lot of petroleum, a lot of gas stations, but they got some other places too, and they help us prevent new contaminated sites, which is really important because we have a lot of legacy sites with petroleum releases from these tanks that we're still working on cleaning up.
That's a fact. Well, okay, so chemicals in water, bad. That's an easy math problem to understand, I think, for a lot of us, until you start to dig in and think, okay, well, swimming pools, chlorine's great. Water, fluoride's great for my drinking water. But when you're talking about a place like the Duwamish, it's not a swimming pool. It's not going to be a primary source of water for a lot of people right now. But from an economic, spiritual, social, public health, recreational standpoint, it's carrying a lot of weight. What kind of chemicals are you seeing when you do this kind of cleanup work? Why are they a problem?
There were a lot of different industrial uses and other uses along the Duwamish River throughout its history. So we see a wide variety of chemicals. And our program actually focuses not as much on the cleanup in the river. EPA is the lead for that part of the cleanup, but we focus a lot on all of the cleanup sites along the river.
Okay.
So our goal is to get the contaminants out of those sites so that we're not having those contaminants move from soil, groundwater, and into the river, so that as EPA is cleaning up the sediment, we're not recontaminating that river. We're keeping it clean for the future. So one specific important chemical that we see in the river and in a lot of the sites along the river are polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs.
PCBs, I've heard of PCBs.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always spell out the acronym, but I wanted to get the whole chemistry.
I appreciate that. Yes, there will be a test.
Yeah, PCBs show up on sites for a lot of reasons. They were in electrical transformers on power lines. They were used in industrial processes. They were in building materials. They were good at a lot of things, so we use them in a lot of things. Unfortunately, they also do things like cause cancer, so they're less great when they get out into the environment. And once they get in the environment and get into that river, they accumulate in sediment and in organisms that live in the river in the sediment, all the way up to fish. And at this point, you hear me say fish, that's shorthand for fish, shellfish, and anything else you might want to eat out of that river for today's purposes. That both people like to eat and other animals like to eat. And so that's one of the
carry-down effect then.
There is. And so that's one of the big immediate problems that we all like to talk about a lot of why we need to clean up this river is there's fish advisories for the Duwamish River right now to try to keep people healthy who are fishing in that river. But we all are working hard on cleanup to hopefully someday have those advisories be unnecessary.
Yeah. Okay. So contamination could be historical. It could be new though, right? What kind of new contamination are you finding?
Yeah, it is both. And as you've heard us talk about cleanup sites, we're mostly dealing with historical contamination because the good news is best practices for businesses over the years have gotten better when we think about chemical use and storage and disposal. So we don't have as many new releases as we used to. There's a couple other programs at Ecology that work more on current chemical sources that might be getting into the river. Our hazardous waste and toxics reduction program inspects businesses that use chemicals to make sure they're following those best practices and keeping them out of the environment. Also, if you've been along the river to see the number of outfalls into the river, you know there's a lot of stormwater that enters the river. So we're talking stormwater that comes from rainfall. There's a lot of paved surfaces. It has to go somewhere.
And that's not even thinking about king tides as well and all the havoc that can cause. Yeah.
So our water quality program works with businesses and other entities along the river to minimize the amount of chemicals that are in that stormwater and combined sewer overflows that are getting to the river.
Okay.
And certainly that work, I've mentioned specific ecology programs, includes a number of partners like City of Tukwila in Seattle and King County and Boeing and others. It's not just us who's working on this problem.
Is there, when you look at all this work, the historical contaminants, is there one that really sticks out? Like there was this, one chemical that everyone was putting in there in the 1960s, for example, and it's still hanging around in the sediment.
I think PCBs are the big
PCBs,
ones, right?
that's the big one.
They hang out a long time. They don't break down by themselves in the environment. What we're seeing there is really what's accumulated over decades that we're still working on getting out of there.
Right. So then at ground level, if someone is leaving today's audience, leaving the stream and walking around later on tonight near the Duwamish, for example, what are they going to see that Ecology is doing? There's not an ecology blimp, obviously, over a work site, but what are they going to see?
There is not a blimp. That would be fun.
We'll request one.
Yeah. So a lot of these cleanup sites we've been working on for a long time, but the really big stuff that people see doesn't happen until the end when we get to clean up construction. That's when big equipment comes out, when we're out there doing excavations, so especially in a dense industrial area that just makes it easier for somebody passing by to notice something going on. But last fall, in a big exciting milestone, cleanup construction started in the river, which some people may have seen either in person or on, videos and photos.
What does in-river construction look like?
So they float an excavator out on a barge. They're out there dredging sediment, which means digging out contaminated sediment. There's a lot of support barges around it. They put that sediment on a barge. They float it down to what we call a transloading facility that then takes it and ships it off to the landfills where it needs to go to be safely disposed of.
Okay, easy enough, but not so easy, I'm guessing.
No, there's many years of design work and planning and facility design and infrastructure that went into that alone.
Yeah, okay. Well, a heavy schedule, I'm sure. But how long has it taken to get to this point in the cleanup?
It's taken a couple decades at a lot of cleanups, including, for sure, a big complicated cleanup like the Lower Duwamish Waterway Superfund site with how big that stretch of river is, how many different sites we're working on near the river, right, and different potential sources, how much design work and sampling has gone into that.
All the cooks in the kitchen too, everybody that's doing the work itself.
It is. There are so many partners involved in this work, who are so important. And I mean, that's at the upper end, but we certainly not uncommon that we see individual cleanup sites that take that long for a lot of reasons, from when we first hear about them to when they get fully cleaned up. Some of those reasons are the kind of logistical stuff everybody runs into in their jobs, right? We need to go out and do a bunch of sampling or excavation, and we have to work around an operating business and structures that take some extra work. I'm sure many listeners are familiar with the big old Jorgensen Forge buildings that are no longer there, that got demoed in the last couple of years. And while they certainly didn't do that for us, you can imagine that if we need to excavate some soil as part of a cleanup, it's a lot easier now than it would have been with those buildings there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's a big one. Another big one is money. Cleanups are big and expensive. And under our regulations, the companies who did the polluting are the ones who pay for the cleanup and need to come up with those resources. And at big sediment dredge projects like the Lower Duwamish Superfund site are some of the most expensive we see, and those run into the hundreds of millions of dollars for a full cleanup.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's bring it down just a little bit from the big companies that are paying the hundreds of millions of dollars to the you and me and everybody that's, buying groceries and running our lives as we need to. From an everyday perspective, how is this work improving lives day to day?
There's, hopefully in a lot of ways, we work hard at this work because we hope it benefits everybody, people, plants, and animals. I know we talk a lot about people, but we also mean those other things. A couple things in this region in particular, we've mentioned big industrial sites. There's other places along the river that are community spaces and green spaces and parks that have some historical contamination involved that we're working on right now. And the faster we can get those cleaned up, the faster that benefits the people who live in those neighborhoods who use those parks every day.
Yeah.
So that's certainly something we keep in mind and work hard on. And we talked about those fish advisories, and those fish advisories are in place because of the combination of all of the sites along the river that have contributed. So for each one we can get cleaned up, that's one step closer to getting those fish advisories removed.
Yeah. Fish advisory goes up and it says, hey, don't eat this fish, it's real bad. But what practically is going to happen to a person if they ignore a fish advisory like that?
The fish advisories have some guidelines for how much we recommend is safe to eat. And again, those safe values are meant to be conservative and protective of the most sensitive people among us to chemical exposure and try to limit any chance that you get a disease out of eating those fish.
Yeah.
So,
like Sandra was talking about, kids probably, right? The hand-to-mouth kind of folks.
They are, and for fish advisors in particular, it's very heavily dependent on how much fish is a part of your diet. So people who fish, tribal members in particular, tend to have higher fish consumption rates than some of us. People who use this river for subsistence fishing to survive, which is a big important part of their survival, are likely to be eating more fish out of the river. So those are really the people we are most targeting with these advisories and most quickly trying to work to help.
Fantastic. Well, Kim Wooten from Ecology's Toxics Cleanup Program, thanks for joining us on the panel today. I know we have a break here, but don't go away. There's a lot more to talk about. We have Forever Chemicals coming up soon, too.
Rainier Avenue Radio.
Sing with us as we fill the historic Columbia City Theater with our voices. Join Crowdsource Choir on May 23rd for a soulful, participatory night of singing. Come raise the collective vibration with us at the Columbia City Theater. Tickets at crowdsourcechoir.com.
What's going on, world? It's your boy OG Mambo, and your guy D Money. Join us along with Pint Size Patron and ID Yourself
here on Fresh Juice at Rainier Avenue Radio
every Wednesday hump day from 9 to 11 Pacific.
Get exclusive interviews from your favorite artists, all the hottest music, and updates on what we got going on in the world.
That's every Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m. on Seattle's Rainier Avenue Radio.
We are strong, we are resilient, and we will get through this together. But these are stressful times, and it's important to also practice good self-care. It's normal to feel overwhelmed, anxious, or afraid, but there is hope. Reach out to someone, connect with your friends, stay in touch with your community, and know that you are not alone.
Tune in to Real Estate and Money every Tuesday afternoon from 2:30 to 3 here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Join your hosts Violetta Strash with John L. Scott Kent North and Tina Lombard with Guaranteed Rate Affinity. They'll help you navigate the waters of our volatile real estate market and offer you some guidance on how to make your hard-earned money work to make your dreams come true. Learn about current trends, get tips on financial matters, and have fun, interactive discussions about your home inside and out. That's Real Estate and Money.
So I needed to check my kids' immunization records for their school. My doctor told me I could get them quickly online, but I couldn't figure out how. Thankfully, I could turn to Link to Care WA for help. With Link to Care WA, I was able to learn how to use online health portals, use telehealth to talk to my doctor virtually, and even apply for jobs online. I called their free hotline and got help from a real person. Call Link to Care WA at 866-757-1832 or visit linktocarewa.org.
Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio.
Far smarter than me and far more interesting to listen to as well. This is all part of our Healthy Earth, Healthy You panel that Rainier Avenue Radio has invited us to do. So next up, we have some more chemical talk. But this is the kind that you've probably seen a little bit in the headlines. And maybe these kind of chemicals are making their way into the Duwamish as well. PFAS, or what some have called forever chemicals. Justin Rewerts is on the panel today and is not a forever chemical himself, but is a forever chemist, which is what we like to hear. Justin, I know you and your communications manager have been very busy in recent years with these compounds that can harm humans and orcas and wildlife. And what in the world is Washington doing to tackle the PFAS problem?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Taylor. So first off, PFAS are a group of thousands of chemicals that have a lot of different functions. And because they're used in so many different functions, they're used in a wide variety of products. So they're used in anything from firefighting foams, nonstick cookware, rugs, clothes, cleaning products, and food packaging, just to kind of name a few, right? And the unique chemistry that makes them so applicable to a lot of different products is also what makes them persistent and toxic in the environment. So the same things that enable all of these products to either fight fires, keep our clothes clean and rugs clean, or the surfaces that we cook our food on, all of these are persistent and toxic in the environment, and their persistence is one reason why they're called forever chemicals.
Okay, so when we think about forever chemicals, or really any chemical that ecology is trying to work with, we often think of the phrase source control, right? Tell me a little bit about source control, what it means to you as far as stopping pollution or contamination at its root, and the things that your team is working on.
Yeah, so source control, or we also call it hazard reduction, where instead of focusing on the risk that the chemical could potentially impart to humans or the environment, what we do is we focus on the source and the hazard. So we try to stop chemicals like PFAS from entering the environment in the first place as a means of controlling the hazards. We do that by doing research to find out where toxic chemicals are coming from, so like which specific products. And then we do research to find safer, feasible, and available alternatives that can perform the same or a similar function in those products, but are generally safer and more environmentally friendly. They would actually break down if it were like a safer alternative, for example.
Okay, so on that products note, no one watching or listening is going out and buying firefighting foam on their own. But what kind of products are you studying that maybe they are?
Oh gosh, let's see. We're studying lots of different products right now. We're looking into things like jewelry, so we're looking at lead and cadmium in jewelry. We're looking into chemicals called siloxanes in cosmetics. We have PFAS and other things other than just firefighting foams or firefighting PPE. We've also looked at PFAS in apparel, for example, to keep clothes waterproof. So if you think your rain jackets, those are the types of products we're talking about too.
Right. Persistent is the scientific word that I've seen a lot in some of the literature out of ecology. Persistent in the environment is what PFAS is. What does that mean to me, though? I mean, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it's been more than 15 or more years since I've been in a chemistry class. What does persistent in the environment mean?
Luckily, when you get into grad school, the meanings of words tend to really transfer well. It's just really fancy sounding how they present them.
Oh, this is good. Okay.
But persistence is exactly what it sounds like. When we say a chemical is persistent, we mean it persists. It sticks around for a really, really long time. In the cases of PFAS specifically, they're called forever chemicals because they take a very long time to break down into very small parts that can then be essentially processed by the environment, for example. And so I believe PFAS are so persistent that it takes the scale of tens of years to break down. And so PFAS are called forever chemicals because by the time we're all long and gone, PFAS are so persistent that they'll still be in the environment after everyone in this panel and in this room right now are long gone.
That's terrifying, Justin. That's horrifying. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move along to some consumer products that maybe we need to be a little bit more cautious with then. I'll use my own scalp as an example here. I don't buy a lot of shampoo anymore for reasons that are going to be obvious to those watching the video stream, but not so obvious on just the audio. That's why I was in radio, not TV for a long time. How do my purchases, for example, of shampoo or shampoo for my wife, intersect with toxic chemicals in the environment? How do toxics in the environment and my purchases all come together when I have the urge to herbal?
Yeah, so where your shampoo would come into this would be kind of in the life cycle of the product. So thinking about your shampoo, right? First, someone has to make that consumer product, right? And then when you take it home, you buy it, you put it on your scalp, or your wife puts it in her hair.
Yeah,
right.
Scalp. Yep.
And then once you essentially use it, you rinse it off your hair or your body, right? And the chemicals that were in your shampoo just don't go away after that fact. It's not like you rinse them in water and all of a sudden they just turn into nothing. What happens is those chemicals wash off of your body and go into the drain, where they then go into the sewer and then eventually through the wastewater treatment plants, which do a great job at removing these contaminants. But it does mean that we have to be mindful because our usages do impact the environment this way.
Okay. Now, I was not aware that the wastewater treatment plants are doing such a good job. Actually, I mean, this is not one of the talking points that we kind of emailed back and forth about, but how good of a job are they doing? I don't want to put you under the gun necessarily.
Well, while I can't really answer exactly with metrics, wastewater treatment plants actually have a lot of robust technology to kind of, for lack of a better word, filter out the chemicals that are in the wastewater to reclaim it. So yeah, there's just a lot of really interesting resins, soils, sedimentation tanks, etc. A lot of really technical things where PFASs can just kind of accumulate and stay out of our water.
You were getting excited there. This is very cool. Okay, so that's the wastewater supply, the wastewater treatment side of this thing. But there's also, along the consumer side, probably something that folks saw in the headlines quite a bit as far as toxics in cosmetics. right? When we say toxics in cosmetics, whether it's in the legislative language or a conversation at the dinner table, is it mostly makeup we're talking about, or hair gel, or what qualifies for you in ecology as a cosmetic?
Great question. Cosmetics are actually more than just makeup, actually. Cosmetics are anything from makeup, foundation, blush, to lotions, soap, even your shampoo counts as a cosmetic.
Really? Okay. All right. So in this world of ours, then, that we have these potentially toxic chemicals in cosmetics, and I'm not reading ingredients lists maybe as closely as I should, why is formaldehyde showing up in some of these cosmetics?
Yeah, so formaldehyde is often used as what's called a preservative, which means that it's added to the cosmetics in order to prevent microbial growth. So if you're sticking your fingers into a jar of lotion, putting it on your body and reapplying, there's a chance that bacteria will grow. So the formaldehyde is supposed to be essentially biocidal. It kills the germs that could potentially grow in a product. But we also see formaldehyde in chemical hair straighteners, particularly ones that require some form of heat to be activated. So when you think about populations, like just within a small piece of like the cosmetics pie, right? Like thinking about hairdressers being exposed to all of these different types of cosmetics, in addition to the more industrial strength, like hair straighteners that are heat activated. And so, yeah, it's just a very small part of a very widespread problem.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to learn a lot more about the work you do once we're done with this, because holy cow, I might have to change some shopping habits. Justin Rewerts, ecology chemist specializing in toxic chemicals. Thank you for taking part here in our Healthy Earth, Healthy You panel.
Thank you.
But this is not where we end. No, there are a couple more speakers still to speak with us. That's a weird way of saying that, Taylor. Joining us again from Ecology, as all these speakers are, is Carolyn Bowie. Now, reduce, reuse, recycle. That's a phrase probably a lot of us have heard for decades now. I mean, it's right up there with got milk. But recycling, reducing waste here in 2025, it's a lot more developed probably than when that slogan first popped into the scene. And Ecology is funding a ton of stuff to do this. 70% of Ecology's budget, or more or less 70%, is grants, money we distribute to nonprofits and schools, local government agencies. Tell us a little bit about your role and how you are using grants to reduce waste, boost recycling, and then shift away from single-use items.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Like Taylor said, my name is Carolyn Bowie, and I am a waste reduction and recycling specialist at the Department of Ecology. And my work has a lot to do with educating businesses and residents about how we can reduce waste, reduce our consumption, recycle more, and like you said, distribute funding and support to organizations who are doing fantastic work in communities to prevent waste from happening and recycle more. So one of those programs actually specifically distributes funding to local schools across Washington State every year. It's called the Waste Not Washington School Awards. And I want to highlight a school that's just right up the street from here, the Orca K-8 school, who previously was using disposable utensils, dishware. I think a lot of us growing up, I definitely used disposable lunch trays and plastic forks and spoons. But
styrofoam for me. It was the old school styrofoam stuff.
Yeah, same here, right? And now, actually, we have a recent law prohibiting expanded polystyrene foam trays and products. So this funding source that we have at Ecology helped fund reusable bowls, plates, and serviceware at the Orca K-8 school, in addition to a lot of other schools in Washington. So it's a terrific program that's making a real impact for people doing work to switch away from disposables to reusables.
Okay, so schools is one thing. Obviously, there are a ton of forks and spoons that are plastic and thrown away in schools every day. But what about, for the office party where it's Carolyn's birthday? We need 50 plastic forks, and then we're all going to throw them away in about 10 minutes and fill up, our garbage can. And this is going to be repeated all across the city and all across the state and all across the country and on it goes. What kind of work have you been able to do with businesses beyond just the school footprint, the business footprint?
Gosh, well, every business, there are endless ways to reduce waste, recycle more. I think of so many champions at individual organizations who are putting in the work to really take the thoughtful time to assess, like, how can we reduce waste every day? How can we, bring more reusable plates into our kitchens, or provide water pitchers and reusable cups at meetings. But here I'll mention actually another fantastic funding program at Ecology called Next Cycle Washington. And this program in particular gives money to innovative, hardworking people who have a great idea, a big idea, and they want to, it's related to reuse and recycling, but they want to get off the ground and start a business specializing in. So actually nearby in South Seattle, this Next Cycle Washington program recently gave seed money to an organization called the Furniture Repair Bank. And this awesome group of passionate people identified the problem that every year literal tons of waste from furniture goes into landfills. And furniture, is often, maybe it's a bit tattered, or it's old, and it just maybe needs a little bit of TLC and repair, and can live a much longer life. So this Furniture Repair Bank takes donations of furniture, and it's a volunteer-run organization where they spiff it up. They host trainings too to empower other people to repair their own furniture, reupholster furniture, and just clean it up. And then this organization donates that furniture to local families in need. And so the Next Cycle Washington program has helped to train and provide technical assistance to dozens of groups of people who have big and great ideas that span the range from there's like countless examples, but the Furniture Repair Bank is just one I wanted to highlight that's local and doing amazing work. So I encourage everyone listening or watching to check it out.
Well, and it's so cool because I think just about every family has something that you don't want to sit on anymore. In my garage, I've got my great-grandfather's chair that I don't know how I ended up with it. He watched the moon landing in it, but it is so moth-eaten and torn up that I kind of want to throw it away, but there's an alternative then. We can send it to a furniture repair bank. It's fantastic. So that was something that was brand new to me, starting at Ecology 3-4 months ago. I had never heard of a furniture repair bank like that, nor was I very familiar with this next phrase, circular economy. What's a circular economy? Why is that important?
Well, thank you for asking and bringing up the concept of a circular economy. So I think all of us have really grown up in a society where the norm is a model of take, make, use, waste. This linear line where we are extracting resources from the environment, transporting those materials, using a product maybe really briefly before then sending it off to a landfill to get buried in the ground for hundreds or thousands of years as it slowly decomposes. A circular economy model instead really encourages using materials to their maximum value in a way that where we are reusing products, repairing, refurbishing, and sharing with others. I think there are dozens of examples of communities who are really helping to support thrifting and sharing and reusing kind of economy. So the circular economy is all about really maximizing the materials we have in order to lessen our burden on the earth from extraction to disposal.
Okay, I would like to use you as a case study, if that's okay. This isn't necessarily something you've prepared for. You have a very large cup in front of you right now.
I sure do.
You can reuse that many times over, I'm certain, as has kind of become the trend, right, in recent years. Are there other examples of, broad ways that an individual can make a difference as far as reusing items, whether it's, what did SNL call it, a big dumb cup, or anything else?
My big dumb cup, it keeps me very hydrated. I love it. I love using our municipal tap water and reusing this cup every day. Instead of using single-use products like single-use bottled water, or, I try my best to load up my backpack or my car with reusable bags or carry reusable utensils. I personally carry a fork and a spoon with me. And on my best days, if I'm going to a restaurant, I'll bring a Tupperware container to take my leftovers home with me, or even, bringing that to work.
That's commitment.
It's a great thing that I try my best to do. I think we can all try as much as we can to avoid single-use products. But on a broader scale, I think you mentioned reuse has been happening for decades, really centuries. Think about our public libraries. Public libraries are one of the best resources we have to reuse books over and over again. And public libraries have far more resources than that. So it's just such a fantastic system to take advantage of in our local communities. Stemming from public libraries in recent years, we've seen the emergence of these amazing organizations called tool libraries. They're terrific spaces that have tools like saws, hammers, laser levelers, lawnmowers, bike repair tools, even party supplies like a large igloo kind of like beverage container. Like, they have so many items under the sun, and these tool libraries have popped up all around Washington. So in fact, really close to Columbia City here, I know there are a couple of tool libraries in Columbia City. There's one in West Seattle. There's one in the Lake Ridge community nearby. So I really encourage everyone to pull up a map and look for your nearest tool library. They're just awesome. They're also volunteer run. And I think when we think about reuse on a broader scale, it's all around us already. There's rental programs we can be using more of. There's just a lot of opportunity to pause and think about how we can reuse materials before we buy new.
Carolyn Bowie, Ecology's waste reduction and recycling specialist. Thank you for joining us here at Healthy Earth, Healthy You for a discussion. And our next panelist was writing furiously as you were talking about tool libraries. Caitlin, we'll get to that. Hold your horses. So I didn't plan it this way, but Caitlin Kelly is our next panelist. And she is effectively saved for last because she's the best, because she's my person here on the panel from the air quality program at Ecology. So as we sit here, Caitlin, in the Columbia City Theater, we are in what is designated as an overburdened community highly impacted by air pollution. Across the state, there are 16 of these communities, plus some tribal groups that have voluntarily joined in to better measure and reduce air pollution as able. The most densely populated, though, of these 16 communities is right here, South Seattle and South King County. More than 1 million Washingtonians live in those two little bubbles in which we are in right now. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to reduce air pollution in these areas. We've got grant programs. They're not problems, they're gifts. Grant programs that help us reduce vehicle emissions, wood smoke emissions, empower organizations to engage with communities, and then implement and develop some locally led projects to reduce air pollution. So Caitlin Kelly supervises overburdened community grants within air quality at the program, the air quality program at Ecology. Caitlin, air today is way better than it was 55 years ago when Ecology was founded, right? I mean, there's no denying that. But tell me a little bit about your day-to-day work in this role and why reducing air pollution remains such an important priority.
Yes, I'd be happy to. And air pollution has gotten better over time, but there are still things to be done. But first, if you would go along with me and do a little breathing exercise, and if the panelists would like to go along as well, it will help me calm my nerves too. Okay. But if you would just take a big breath in and out, and then think for a moment how many breaths you might take in a day, and try to quantify that. Taylor,
I can't do that.
Take a guess. Just like a ballpark.
Thousands, dozens of thousands?
Dozens of thousands. That's actually a pretty good guess.
Okay.
So we take 17,000 breaths a day, which calculates up to about 6 million breaths a year.
Wow.
Which is a lot. And when we breathe, we don't always think about like what we're breathing in that moment. It's like every breath every 6 million breaths a year, I don't always think like, what is in that air? So it's really important that we are taking steps to reduce air pollution, and the amount of air we breathe and what's in it has a serious impact on our health. And if there's contaminants in the air and things like that, and there's a ton of different contaminants that could be in the air that impacts our health. And so my role at Ecology and like my day-to-day is to reduce sources of air pollution in communities across the state that have high levels of air pollution, but also experience other inequities like social or economic inequities that make it hard to also take steps to reduce air pollution. So my team and I administer grants to the communities to take steps to reduce the sources of air pollution. We actually fund community-led projects. So they use the funding to actually go out and engage the community to actually learn and figure out what the community wants to do to reduce the sources of air pollution. They also can use the funding to implement those projects. So we're really leading and we're really funding community-led, like for communities by communities projects. And it's just a really great opportunity for communities to have a direct impact on their health.
Okay, now let's get to those notes you were scribbling down when Carolyn was speaking. Tool libraries, I believe at least one is among these kind of grants that have been awarded, right?
It is. So that's the great connection to our work across Ecology. So one of the recipients of my program is a tool library. And so a lot of gas-powered, like lawn equipment, things like that, releases air pollutants. And so the people using it may be exposed to it or be producing sources of criteria air pollutants. And so we are funding them to change or purchase electric garden tools instead. So we're actually reducing the source of air pollution, and then the communities can go out and use or rent those tools in the community here.
Community is a really important word that we use when we're talking to you specifically in the grants program, but there's a big phrase that I had to learn when signing on to Ecology: overburdened communities highly impacted by air pollution. It's a big, important, long title, but how did Ecology determine what qualifies as an overburdened community highly impacted by air pollution?
That is a big title. So I like to think about it in two ways. There's the community component and the air quality component. So we use two types of data to identify each of those. So the first kind of bucket is the community indicators. So we took a look at the Washington State Environmental Health Disparities Map and the Environmental Protection Agency's EJ screen. So these are both data tools that overlap where vulnerable populations. So these are kids or people over 65, groups that have pre-existing health conditions that make them more sensitive to air, like pollution in the environment. So all of the pollution we've been talking about today, and where do they live? And then we also looked at indicators like historical redlining or other health disparities. So that's kind of like the community side. And then we also looked at the air quality side and where they had elevated levels of air pollutants. And then we kind of overlaid those. And that's how we identified the 16 communities overburdened and highly impacted by air pollution.
Fair enough. There a lot of work, a lot of metrics went into this. But for a lot of people watching or listening, probably aren't thinking about, street by street, what qualifies as an overburdened community highly impacted by air pollution. They think about, their general cityscape. And when you look at the map, there's a lot of big bubbles that fall under these overburdened community designations, a lot of them along I-5. But when you take a street by street view of air pollution, what kind of health impacts are you seeing? First here in South Seattle, but also broadly among any overburdened community?
Yeah, so there's a lot of health impacts from air pollution that we could talk about. It depends on the air pollutant. So to start off, there's 6 main air pollutants that we talk about. So the criteria air pollutants, they're the ones that we really have identified and are regulating at the national and state level. And the most concerning that we are in Washington is particulate matter or fine particle pollution, or sometimes known as PM 2.5, if I refer to it that way. And so for the 16 communities that we identified, we did an initial report and took a look at the health impacts across those 16 communities in December of 2023. And we're actually doing more assessments to continue looking at the health impacts and look at that over time and how that changes. So we know here in the South Seattle community that this community compared to the rest of Washington actually experiences higher rates of asthma and is expected to have a lower life expectancy compared to the rest of Washington. And then for the rest of those communities, overall, we know that there's a higher risk of respiratory and heart disease and a higher mortality rate due to exposure from PM 2.5. And the health impacts will differ within the community or between the communities. And there's a very long report if you want to dive in and take a look at the community. I'm not going to tell you all.
270 pages long, I think.
Yes, 270 pages long. I'm not going to tell you about it. I also didn't write it. So I will just keep it there. But air pollution it's a serious impact to our health. It's one of the biggest environmental risk factors, and it's something we don't have control over. I can't go and make a choice about what I'm like reusing or like drinking or things like that. I don't get to actually always have control about what I'm breathing in.
That's so true. I mean, wildfire season, we can wear a mask, I guess, but otherwise it's just kind of whatever air brings us day to day. We have only a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you, Caitlin, specifically, when we look at the priorities, South Seattle, South King County, the people that are living around the Columbia City Theater, what kind of grants have been awarded around here? What are people going to notice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a lot of grants in this community, and a lot of them are really community focused and community centered. So we're doing some bike distributions or transportation passes to reduce car pollution. Have a community-based charging station for electric vehicles. We also have projects with organizations that are actually going to go out to the community and talk to community members to design those projects to reduce air pollution and figure out what's important in this community. And we may see projects also, around diesel vehicles and equipment, things like that. Some of the other things that we do in our grant projects.
Fantastic. Caitlin Kelly, Ecology's leader for the Overburdened Communities Grant Program. Thank you for taking time with us today. And thank you to all the panelists who have joined us today. Sandra Matthews, Justin Rewerts, Caitlin Kelly, Kim Wooten, Carolyn Bowie. These are neighbors. These are public servants. These are great people doing work for you. And of course, thank you to the folks here at Rainier Avenue Radio and the Columbia City Theater for hosting us and hosting Healthy Earth, Healthy You. Thank you very much.
Thank you.